Hola a todos! Hello everyone! Welcome to this class about the subjunctive in Spanish, otherwise known as el subjuntivo. My name is Brian, and I've spent the last year teaching English in Spain. And I know when I was learning Spanish in high school, I had a tough time with the subjunctive. Before we start, make sure you're comfortable conjugating verbs in the present tense, like comer and tener, and other verbs. So comer would be yo como, and tú comes, and so on and so forth. Now, what are we going to be learning about today? We're going to be using these sentences that you see in red to help us learn what the subjunctive is. And in all of these, the subjunctive is being used. So what is the subjunctive? What is going on here? The subjunctive is a tense. That's a way that we conjugate verbs. And it's used to express things that are indefinite. Indefinite's an important word here, and I'm going to use it a lot. So let's explain what that means. Indefinite means that it doesn't have good definition. It isn't very clear. Imagine a window, like this one that I've drawn here, and imagine that it's really foggy. And if there was something on the other side of this foggy window, you wouldn't be able to tell. Is that a dog? Is that a cloud? We're not sure. The subjunctive is like a grammatical comparison to that. It's used when the speaker is uncertain or the event we are talking about hasn't occurred yet. In some way, that window is foggy. And the subjunctive is almost always introduced with an expression or a clause. We're going to come back to this idea, but first let's understand how we conjugate the subjunctive. We want to be able to identify when we're using the subjunctive so we can ask this ever important question. Why? Why are we using it, and why has something changed? So if I scroll down, we're going to look at these blue words to help us understand how we conjugate the subjunctive. And we're going to start with the indicative. That's kind of the one that you're most familiar with, the present normal conjugation. And if we take a verb like comer, and for now, I'm going to draw a line through here. And I take a verb like comer, it has two parts. It has com, which we're going to call the root, and er, which is the ending. And we're going to take that root, that com, and to conjugate it, we change the ending. So if I want yo, it'd be yo como, I eat, or tú comes, and so on and so forth. Now the subjunctive adds two steps to this process, but they're easy steps. If I take a word like preferir, to prefer, the first addition is that we take the first person indicative of that verb. That's just a fancy way of saying the yo form. And from that, I would get prefiero, because preferir is irregular. And from here, I'm going to take the root that I want. And we get prefier. And now we change the ending. And this is the second addition, because the ending is a little different. If our verb, if you see this blue box here, if our verb initially ends in AR, we're going to change the ending to end with an E. Or if it ends with an ER or an IR verb, it's going to change to an A. We see that preferir ends in IR, and that's going to become yo. We use the root, prefier, and ends in IR, we're going to add an A to it. Notice that the subjunctive doesn't have O endings. And then we can use this kind of root, this kind of base, to help us conjugate the rest of the verbs. Yo prefiere, tú prefieras, él prefiera, and so on and so forth. Notice that the first person and third person conjugations are the same. You're going to have to learn by context which one of those the speaker is talking about. So let's look at some examples. If we have a verb like hablar, the first person indicative is yo hablo. We take the root of that, and we see that hablar ends in an AR. So we're going to change that to an E, and the subjunctive is yo hable, or tú hables. Dormir becomes duermo, because it's irregular. And we're going to take the root of that and say yo duerm. We see that, we see that dormir ends in IR, so we're going to add an A to the end of it. And tener, Yo, and what's the first person indicative of tener? That's yo tengo. We take the root of that and we get yo tenga, and tú tengas, and so on and so forth. Just as with any other language, there are, however, some irregularities. If we scroll down, there are some verbs that don't follow these rules. We have verbs like dar, which becomes de as its root. Verbs like haber, which becomes haya, ser becomes sea, and ir becomes vaya. These are ones you're going to need to study so that you can learn them. So just to show that, looking here on ir, the subjunctive looks like this. Yo vaya, tú vayas, él vaya, nosotros vayamos, vosotros vayáis, and ellos vayan. I said before that the subjunctive is a way of expressing things that are indefinite, things on the other side of that foggy window. Now that we understand how to conjugate the verbs, how do we use them? Well, that idea of an expression is very important. Almost always, an expression is going to introduce the subjunctive. Our first example is this word here, quizás. Maybe you recognize it because it means maybe. There's even a famous song that sings this, that says this word multiple times in the chorus. And I remember being at a concert in Spain and everyone knew the words. So if we look at this first example, quizás los estudiantes escriban los ensayos. We see here that we're using the subjunctive and we ask that question. Why? Why are we doing that? And the answer lies here in quizás. We're saying maybe this will happen, but maybe not. O quizás no. There are two possible outcomes. We see that also in the second example. Quizás haya helado en el congelador. Haya is the subjunctive. Maybe there's ice cream in the freezer. But the other option is that maybe there's not. Since we're unclear of what's on the other side of our fogged up window, we use the subjunctive. Now, one option I should point out here is that quizás tienes que trabajar más duro. If the speaker is very confident in what they are saying, they wouldn't use the subjunctive. They would keep it the same because they're certain about what they're talking about. Now, expressions like quizás are very useful when we're introducing the subjunctive, but there are other ways, like when we use a clause to introduce the subjunctive. As I scroll down, you're going to see that a clause is a piece of a sentence, and that piece of the sentence has a subject and a verb. Now, the way that we normally combine two clauses in a, and therefore introduce the subjunctive in Spanish is using the word que that we see here. Now, keep in mind that if there's an accent on the E, that's a question, that's what. But if there's no accent, it means that, as in the conjunction, the way that we unite two clauses. We have it in English too. I think that you are beautiful. The first part of the sentence is a clause, the second part of the sentence is a clause, and that unites the two. But in English, we don't need that, while in Spanish, we do. We do need que. Looking at these two examples, creo que necesitamos más tiempo. I think we need more time. Or, él ve que tienen dos perros. He sees that they have two dogs. The subject changes from the first part of the sentence to the second. The first part is I, or he, and the second part is we, or they. The way this looks written down is that you simply have a clause at the beginning, que, which is a bridge, and a clause at the end. Now, these two examples here don't use the subjunctive, and the question we need to ask is, if we're going to use the subjunctive, is the first clause indefinite? Is our window a little bit foggy? We're going to use that question of whether the first part of the sentence is indefinite or not to help us look at a few more examples of the subjunctive. Scrolling down, we'll see these two new examples. No creo que tenga las notas listas, which means I don't believe that he has the grades ready, and creo que tiene las notas listas. I believe he has the grades ready. We'll see that in the first example, he's using the subjunctive. And we're going to look at the first part of the sentence to ask the question, why? The reason is that when you don't believe something, you haven't been given enough information to know what's on the other side of that mirror. What you're saying is still indefinite. And a lot of times when you see the word no in the beginning of the sentence, you're going to use the subjunctive. Contrast that with the second statement. Creo que tiene las notas listas. I believe he has the grades ready. The speaker has been given enough information to make up their mind about what they're talking about, to see on the other side of the mirror. A few more examples. We can see here, es posible que vayamos al concierto. It's possible that we go to the concert. We're using the subjunctive, and we'll ask why. And we'll look to the first part of the sentence to answer that. It's possible that we're going to the concert, but we're not sure of the outcome. With new information, our mind could change. Let's say we did get new information and we said the second sentence, es seguro que vamos al concierto. This is the indicative, vamos, and it is certain that we're going to the concert. More information has come in and we've made up our mind about what we're talking about. This structure, es plus an adjective plus que plus a different clause, is a really useful way to talk about your opinions in Spanish. Looking at the last example, es bueno que demos dinero a la gente sin techo. We see we're using the subjunctive when we ask why. This sentence means it's good that we give money to the homeless. The reason we use the subjunctive is that the first part is an opinion. With more information or with new information, our ideas could change. And that's why we use the subjunctive. My last example of the subjunctive is definitely my favorite because it's the one that it took the longest for me to understand. And it's also one that I can communicate through pictures, and I'm a big fan of pictures. If we look at this graph that I have at the top here, it says present and future. Now you can use the subjunctive to talk about things that haven't occurred yet, but they must always relate to the present. You have some kind of action, some kind of verb that talks about the present, and there's a relationship to the future. If you were only talking about the future, you would be using future tense, which is a different verb conjugation. The way this looks is, if we look here, number 4, esperamos que los perros coman su comida. We hope the dogs eat their food. We see we're using the subjunctive, and we'll ask why. So we look at the first part of the sentence to get our answer. We hope. What's happening is we're hoping right now, but we're hoping for something that hasn't occurred yet and maybe won't occur, which is the dogs eating their food. If we scroll down some more, we have this one. Mis padres quieren que yo vaya a la universidad. My parents want me to go to college. Their wanting is happening now, but what they want is something that could or could not happen in the future. And this last example, tu abuelo manda que vayas al supermercado. Your grandfather demands or commands that you go to the supermarket. His commanding is happening now, but it's referencing something that hasn't happened yet and may or may not happen. So I hope that I've been able to answer some of your questions about the subjunctive, but of course I don't know that yet. If I said that in Spanish, I'd be using the subjunctive. The question we should be always asking, though, is this question of being indefinite. If we look through the window, do we know what's on the other side, if it's foggy or not? Always look at the first clause to ask this question. If you guys have any questions, please post a comment or write me a message. Thank you so much.